Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and in a video I did yesterday, I had a subscriber kind of chime in and say, hey, if you're saying that meat or some animal products, some types of them need to be moderated, or maybe you shouldn't eat them in excess. And by excess, I do mean real excess. I'm not talking about moderate amounts there. That kind of implies they're unhealthy. Why do we need to eat them at all? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about this. All right, he kind of didn't like where I went with that because, I said, well, does that include water and omega-3 fatty acids? Because consumed in excess, those are both dangerous also. And he's like, well, we don't need to be so technical. But we do need to be technical. When people start trying to make generalized rules that are overly simplistic and reductionist like that, it can cause people to come up with really silly ideas. And yeah, there are things like that that are normally occurring that are required for health and required for life. And you need to keep that in mind. There are lots of things that if you do not consume, you will fucking die. That if you consume in excess can either make you sick or can kill you. In some cases, they can kill you a very painful death. So that being said, no, you can't have that sort of mentality. That is not the correct approach to this. Because most vitamins and minerals that you take in, you can overdose on them and die from them. Omega-3 fats, if consumed in excess, lower your immune system. They make you get sick easier. Excessive water, when you causes water intoxication, causes your brain to swell and you die. So no, we don't take that approach. And when it comes to things like meat, the question I would ask is, well, then why don't vegans live longer than other people? If you're going to draw the conclusion, and I'm going to get to what we mean by excess here. If you're going to draw the conclusion that because taking in certain animal products of different types, the excess is different between them, is a problem, then you shouldn't consume them at all. If you're going to use that logic, then you need to be able to prove that. Vegans don't outlive other people. People who avoid all animal products simply do not live longer, and the longest lived population on Earth, the healthiest population on Earth, still has animal products in their diet pretty much every day. The take home of the other video was for people to understand that consuming mostly unprocessed foods, consuming a mostly whole food, mostly plant-based diet is the healthiest. And that's the problem, is that you get people who hear something like that and then it's an all or nothing thing. It's like people seem to need this hyperbole. They need everything to be black and white. They don't understand that there are healthy ranges of things you can take in. And just because something has an unhealthy range doesn't mean that it's ideal for you to just stop completely. And the reality is, yeah, people who don't consume any animal products don't seem to live longer than people who do. They don't seem to be any healthier than people who do. Than people who follow normal balanced diets. And in some cases, the people who follow normal balanced diets that include some animal products actually seem to be healthier. So there's your problem. People can argue all they want with make little rules of thumb, but it doesn't change any of that. It doesn't change anything. So what do I mean by excess? Well, I was talking about excess protein. All right, there's questions about because we haven't studied it. This is where we don't have research. So when people try to say, well, ultra high protein diets are perfectly fine, can you prove that? And that's the problem. People say, well, there's been short-term studies and they didn't seem to have problems. People who had healthy kidneys. All right, well, not everyone has healthy kidneys, but people who have healthy kidneys and healthy livers seem to do just fine on really high protein diets when they're studied for 6 months or a year. Yeah, but have we taken studies of people, a large enough demographic of people who are consuming 250, 300, 350 grams of protein a day, what a lot of these bodybuilders are recommending? Do we have any studies over 30 years long on individuals like that? How about we have 100 of them to look at and compare them to various populations and see if they have more health problems or they live longer or live less? No, we don't. We don't actually have a study like that. So when you try to say, well, tons of excess protein is probably fine, well, no, we don't have evidence for that. And there is evidence that it does put some strain on your body. It's probably not fine. And you know what? If there was a benefit to it, I might say, okay, well, that's a reasonable risk to take. Because, we don't know for a fact it's bad for you. We just speculate that it could be. We can't prove that it's healthy or unhealthy, right? But we can prove that it doesn't offer any benefits. And that's the take-home message there. Guys are like, well, I need that much protein to gain muscle. No, it doesn't seem to be the case. High protein diets, and every study that's ever been done that I've seen show that people gain just as much muscle on high protein diets as they do on ultra high protein diets. In fact, even people who are on anabolics who are gaining muscle 2 or 3 times faster than a human being can under any other circumstances gain just as much muscle on high protein diets. They don't seem to need 300 grams of protein either. High protein diets are useful for gaining muscle, but high protein is still going to be less than what's being recommended to bodybuilders, just 1 gram per pound of body weight. That's just not necessary. It doesn't seem to be necessary to actually gain maximal muscle mass. So when people are promoting something like that, I would say, but there's no evidence, and all the evidence seems to suggest that it isn't necessary to maximize muscle gain. So why would you subject yourself to the risk unnecessarily? Hell, why would you subject yourself to the financial cost on top of it? I mean, eating 300-400 grams of protein a day is insanely expensive in most countries, in most regions, unless you just really, really like cheap chicken breast. Otherwise, you're going to get tired of it. Or you really, really like cheap protein powders. But you guys kind of see where I'm going there. It's not really necessary. That's the point, and it is questionable as far as the long-term health of it. It is still very questionable with no benefits other than bro lore and myth that's not proven, and that the opposite seems to be true, that it isn't necessary. So that's kind of the point there. But we're talking about a lot of protein. It's not like someone who eats a pound of meat a day, of lean meat a day, is going to be at risk of consuming an ultra-high protein diet because they're probably eating 150, probably at most 200 grams of protein. Not a big deal. Okay, we're not talking about protein in that range as being particularly unhealthy. The other concern really of where a lot of the concerns over animal products comes down to large amounts of saturated fat. But that's not all animal products. That is really a product of the modern era, because animals inherently, like if you look at historic society, or all of history, anthropology, most experts agree that without consuming meat, humans as they are today would not exist. We would not have the intelligence that we have today. We wouldn't have the cognitive ability that we have today. That comes from our ancestors eating cooked meat and cooked foods. So even the raw vegans are out there. That seems to have been a very, very important part of our development as far as developing our brains, our brain capacity, our cognitive ability. That's a big deal. And humans have always eaten animal products, always have, in whatever amounts that they could find them. And that's the problem we run into, is that historically very few cultures could live on a diet that was, a third or even a half animal products. All right, they just didn't have access to that much. Even hunting and fishing, it's really, really hard to get 50% of your calories from wild game and wild eggs that you can scavenge and things. It's really difficult. And part of that's because the animals are so lean. All right, the animals are so lean found in the wild animal. You go get a grass-fed bison out on the plains like the American Indians, you're going to be surprised how low fat your diet is if that's your main source of fat. They're going to be very low in saturated fat. Most wild game is. It's the grass-fed, cultivated animals we have that allow us to have all this saturated fat in our diet. It's the fact that we raise them and feed them out to make them fat. That's the reason there's a risk of saturated fat. That's not how it occurs naturally. Now, the difference could be in milk, but in the modern era, of course, we've learned to filter all the fat out of milk. It's easy to get fat-free dairy, thus eliminating the concerns completely. And you guys need to remember, most experts in the field don't think protein is actually bad for you at all. It's only a couple of quacks who are vegan quacks who believe this from very outdated data that they personally have. And the modern scientific data doesn't suggest that moderate or even high amounts of animal protein is a problem. It's only when we're talking about very excessive amounts. But it's that argument being made by a few quacks who have a big following that make people think that any animal protein is bad for you or causes cancer or anything. It's just not the case. And again, it seems to be a normal part of the human diet going back well over 1 million years, millions of years, in fact. It's a normal part of our diet. I mean, it just is what it is. And again, the longest lived, healthiest culture on earth still eats it. But the concern with the saturated fat is, again, a product of the modern era. You just don't see that in nature. This is something that we have cultivated artificially, just like we've cultivated all these refined sugars and everything. And if we were to use this same logic that people use there, that because we know excessive fructose is bad for you, which is generally going to come from consuming large amounts of refined sugars, right? That's where people get excessive fructose intake from table sugar and high fructose corn syrup. If we use this same logic, then that would mean fruit is bad for you, because moderating fructose seems to be beneficial to health. So that would mean consume no fructose. That means you could never eat a piece of fruit. That's the sort of logic being used here. And I don't think there's any registered dietitian anywhere out there who's going to tell you that consuming a couple pieces of fruit a day is going to hurt you. In fact, most of them would tell you a lot of people could benefit from eating a lot more fruit. But using this chain of logic, if moderating fructose means all fructose is bad, then you shouldn't consume fruit at all. That's the level of logic we're dealing with here. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.